So good morning to everyone. Warmly welcome me now and land in the UNFCCC. This seminar is part of the ongoing series of UN climate negotiation related seminars organized by Pan-African Farmers Organization, PAFO, Andreas Hermes Academy, World Farmers Organization, and Food and Forest Development Finland. As we are already familiar with each other due to the long series of seminars, we don't do a round of introduction of each of the organizers, but we instead prepare to dedicate this limited time to hear from the latest of this topical issue from the invited experts, and of course followed by the discussion amongst the participants here. Having said that, I could briefly, however, introduce myself. I'm Noora Simola, climate and forestry expert in Food and Forest Development Finland, and also your moderator in this event today. And also, maybe briefly, I would like to introduce my colleague, Shadrach Steneza from PAFO, who is the program assistant and who will take care of the technical coordination of this event today. And while I'm sharing my screen, yes, I hope you see my screen now, and very good. So I have to share the screen other times because I have no problem with the, once again, that the slides don't change. Just 1 sec. Out.
It looks very good.
Yes, the slides don't change, don't they? Very good. Shad, if you could quickly go through the housekeeping rules for today about the English-French translation available. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shadrach Senes. I'm the program assistant at Pan-African Farmers Organization. In today's session, it's better to make sure that our microphone is muted, because when you are unmute, it sometimes cause problem for others and the moderator and someone who's presenting. So it's better to make sure that you are muted. So we are recording this session, but we are recording only the first part. It means that the discussion part, you are not recording the discussion. So feel free to share your ideas, because you are not recording the second part of the discussions. Also, if you have questions, better to raise your hand or you write in the chat box, so that we send your question to the moderator and answer your question. The material of this session will be shared with you at the end of the session. Actually, we share the audio and the video. Everything we are recording here will be shared with you. We share also with this PowerPoint, and everything related to the session will be shared with everyone here in the room. Thank you very much. Have a fruitful session.
Thank you, Shadrach, for guiding us through the housekeeping rules. And as mentioned, the French translation is available. And about today's objectives, today we really try to understand the integration of mitigation in the UNFCCC. What is the history and current state of play? And what are the best practices? And also discuss a little bit of the financing of mitigation activities in the latter. So we learn about the concepts of mitigation and how is it relevant to the land use sector. We gain understanding of mitigation and its work programs, work streams in the framework of UNFCCC. About the integration of land use related mitigation in the national determined contributions. And the program today is shown here. So we have expert presentations. We have Mr. Wangi James Kinuanyu and Tuomo Kalliokoski. And then we have questions and answers. And the seminar 1.5. And let's go to some concepts. So mitigation, as we have discussed in the previous seminar, greenhouse gas sinks. And here we see that this terminology includes quite difficult concepts, but see greenhouse gas from the atmosphere. And the greenhouse gases, as we remember, are the carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides, but also fluorinated gases nowadays, which are totally man-made emissions, whereas carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides, they actually prevail in the nature. And these greenhouse gases are very important. I think that the atmosphere percent is made of really oxygen, but it's 1% that includes these greenhouse gases as well, and which are then forming a greenhouse gas layer to the atmosphere, which is reflecting back the radiation from the sun and causing and severe impact. Then maybe on the right here, we have also IPCC definition of mitigation. IPCC had a special report on mitigation in 2007. And they really emphasize in this report that it means implementing policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhancing. So it's really active policies, mechanisms, activities that we are talking about. And, we could ask, of course, that why is this important and why is it the crucial part of the UNFCCC? Mitigation is really one of the talking about temperature increase of 2.7 on average. We have, however, NDC targets that could currently bring this temperature increase to 2.4. However, we need to go.
Mais nous devons aller encore plus loin parce que cette année est importante au niveau de
Climate negotiations, because we are talking about the global stocktake where these national determined contributions, NDCs, are already evaluated, where we are now, what needs to be done next. And like we were discussing the mitigation concept, that it's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance things. So we have the two sides. So we have the emissions, and let's say that, you know, the big baddie, the worst baddie is of course the fossils. You know, we have coal, oil and gas that has been used throughout the industrial period and causing emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. However, in this session, we focus on agriculture and forestry and land use sector in general, which accounts about 20% of the human-made emissions currently. And quite big portion of that is actually from the deforestation. And if you look at the PAFO sector sort of emission hotspots on the right currently, they are the red ones are the, you know, major emission sources, and they are very much due to deforestation, forest fires, and also in the case of Asia, emissions from the peatlands. Well, let's go to the mitigation potential side. We were talking about reducing emissions and creating sinks. And how is land use sector relevant to this? So here you have in the picture a diagram from IPCC special report, figure from IPCC special report published in 2019 on climate change and land, global mitigation potential. You see that there are very many majorly potential activities, areas of work that are very relevant to the land use sector and agriculture and forestry. We have sustainable forest management, agroforestry, decreasing deforestation, forest degradation, forest fire prevention, biochar, soil improvement, so on. So we are very much discussing a very topical issue today. And I think that we're going to have a good overview of the NDCs. How are they relevant in land use sector and mitigation efforts in the land use sector, especially where we are with those NDCs, but also about the overview of the mechanisms and the current state of play in the mitigation efforts in the UNFCCC. But at this point, I'm actually, I would like to invite our first guest speaker, expert speaker online. And please welcome Wangi James Kinuanjui, who is one of the authors of the IPCC guidelines for greenhouse gas inventories, experienced MRV expert on forestry and land use, and also reviewer of country reports under the UNFCCC. And I promised to share the slides. You wish that I would share the slides, so just give me a moment. I will open your presentation from here. Meanwhile, please, Wangi, most welcome to introduce.
As it has been said, I'm Wangi. I live in Kenya. As you worked on the IPCC guidelines, and these are guidelines that help people to estimate carbon and carbon emissions or reductions from specific mitigation actions. I have also reviewed country reports that deal with greenhouse gas inventories. Last week, I dealt with the Bahamas. In Africa, I've been able to reports from Rwanda, from Ghana, also been involved in reports from Zambia. So I've worked in Nigeria in operationalizing the system for forest monitoring. Worked in Ethiopia in terms of improving management of plantation forests. And even in Rwanda on improved forests in Kenya, I've been as a lead strategy. Presenting.
Oh, please go ahead. I will mute. Please let me know when you slide.
Thank you. This is my first opportunity to interact with the team. I understand that some training, fit some things, go through them very briefly. So I can go to the next slide. I brief understanding. I know all of us understand is elements of weather, because we say, how can we tell that? Can go to the next slide again, because some of this has been presented again. Much to it, but we ask ourselves out of that slide is emissions come from, and how do we reduce these emissions, or how do our mitigation actions refer to these gases? We go to the next one. And then we ask ourselves, how are we responding to negative effects of climate change? And I know you have gone through what adaptation is, and this is what most of the common people on the ground are doing. But also, we also get involved in mitigation efforts. And we say, all of us together, we can help meet, as been described, Paris Agreement slide. And this slide, Conference of Parties provides us. We understand that the UNFCCC has these organized some form of discussions, and this is where people meet, parties meet, activist groups meet, and they discuss and they make decisions. Again, I don't want to make much, and like, for example, the Paris Agreement was made as part of this. So we go to the next slide. Now, some of these discussions, because we ask ourselves, where did this story of mitigation come from? And the mitigation comes from the Kyoto Protocol. The global community decided that we have to reduce emissions. We have to do some commitments. And this in reduce the emissions that are going to that are causing causing the greenhouse effect and the climate change. And so 2007, there is this Bali Action Plan, which talks about long-term vision. And we have to get a vision to reduce climate change. Then 2009, about setting guidelines so that we have robust in Cancun activities specific started being identified, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Question about how started being, and by 2030, the of land uses, forest types, monitoring how we're going to utilize our monitoring systems. They were discussed. There are a few things maybe I may not mention in my slide, but some of them I will illustrate as we continue. We go to the next slide. Again, how do we monitor? How does it affect our sustainable development goals? And how do we monitor also this? 2018, limiting global temperature rise. This is mitigation. I've skipped the Paris Agreement because I'll come back to it. And then COP27, we're talking about finance, developing finance to be able to meet some of the objectives. And next month or this month, we are going to COP28 in Dubai. A number of issues have been, right? Now, for the Paris Agreement with regard to mitigation, the temperature goals have been set, has been described with a good illustration. Then we are talking about climate the NDC targets will be monitored. Every country will be saying, in the year 2026, we set to reduce emissions by 20 million tons, but we have attained 5 million. The reason is 1, 2, 3, so that we are able to meet our commitments. And if we cannot meet our commitments, we describe the reasons. Unfortunately, in my slide, I never talked about the different kinds of commitments when we make our NDCs. Sometimes we say this is conditional and this is non-conditional. For example, Kenya says we would like to reduce emissions by 32% of what would be occurring in 2030. But because we are a poor country, we say that we will achieve this if we get this amount of money, or if we are allowed to be paid for this effort. So that is under the piece. Then about Article 5 talks about encouraging sinks and reservoirs. And one best reservoir or sink is our forests. Encourage that we continue biochar is now coming enhancing that support. South Africa, Ghana are leading in Africa in developing what they call the national inventory reports, where they describe their emissions, by sources, by sinks, and we will be able to identify the role of the sector, whether it is improving and how it is going down. Kenya's question is, who is monitoring the number of trees planted, and how does this translate to the carbon emission reduction? Go to the next slide. Oh, it's like I've skipped one slide. Maybe I go back one slide. I'm sorry. This one of nationally determined contributions, I wanted to talk a bit on detail because we have said, how will the NDCs be done? I don't want to give the details, but we have said 5 years, all countries were requested to submit revised NDCs. I know Rwanda was the first country to submit the revised NDC. Our countries have done that. And then we can revise them after every 5 years, because as we grow, we realize that our emission trend keeps on changing. Some of our countries want to develop because we are least developed countries. So we may request that we increase emissions slightly to meet the demands of our people. So we are told that every 5 years you can revise your targets. And then, like we have said, every 2 years, we need to keep on reporting. Every 1 year, actually, for Annex 1 countries, developed countries like Finland, they're supposed to provide a national inventory report. And then I had given examples, which some of them are not from the land sector, but we have said, I've been to Nigeria, and I know they use a lot of generators for power. One of the mitigation actions would be, could they adopt renewable energy sources, wind energy? I know Kenya has really adopted wind energy and geothermal, but in some countries it may not be possible. In a country like DRC, deforestation is a threat to the tropical forest. Maybe emission reduction mitigation action would be reduce deforestation. In Ghana, which I've not written here, I know they have shea butter landscape, cocoa landscape, where they say that, and let the people describe shea butter as a forest, those plantations, so that we encourage more people to plant them. It's a tree crop, the same as cocoa, but these kind of definitions are based on national circumstances. In some countries, we don't introduce that because when we allow a commercial plant to be grown extensively, it might also affect the natural forest and all that. And we say in Kenya, we have large-scale cattle by the Maasai, by other communities, cattle ranching, and cows release a lot of methane. And then we ask ourselves, maybe we would have reduced the number of cows and breeded more productive animals. maybe the zero grazing units, with a cow producing 40 liters instead of keeping 40 cows that give 1 liter each. And now we are talking about adoption of electric vehicles to reduce use of fossil fuels, and that is also a mitigation action. Go to the next slide. And this is where I've talked about agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. And we see that at least about 20% come from here. And this is where Africa has the biggest potential, because one, our industries are not very developed, they don't emit a lot. We say Africa just emits around 1%. But now we ask ourselves, but how can we also participate in the global emission reduction program? Mainly we could go to our forest and other land uses, our livestock, they have given, like not given. There is a way of classifying emission calculations, which I did not put there, so that we see what the sources and sinks are for each of these. We go to the next slide. Livestock, we have said, and enteric fermentation, and I have explained. I'm sorry that I think I wrote my slide in a hurry. Some spellings are wrong. And we talk about chewing cud by animals, anaerobic conditions, and release of CO4. But the question is, what do we do as a mitigation action? And we perform this and say, we have contributed to the global emission reduction by reducing the number of livestock, by introducing very efficient breeds, by using more nutritious livestock feeds, so that we reduce the amount of food that we give to the animals. And this now becomes also an adaptation measure, because if I was buying for my cows 20 kilos per day of fodder, now I'm just buying 10, which means I reduce money that I'm spending. So it becomes more of a mitigation action, but also an adaptation action, because I'm saving money, managing our manure and emissions to reduce emissions. And that we have said incorporating biochar into the soil could also be another activity. That one doesn't come from livestock. On land, what I looked at is the next one, the next slide. The next slide, we talk of what are those activities that cause emissions on land. We do deforestation, where we cut down trees and clear areas. Now, I want to explain briefly about deforestation. What is deforestation? Every country is supposed to define what a forest is because of their national circumstances. I have not written this in my slides, but I want to give 3 or 4 examples. The IPCC guidance, based on FAO's also advice, FAO, says the forest is an area that is has trees of about 10% of the land cover. The trees are about 5 meters height. Then we have said what could be the area. The FAO says a minimum of 0.5 hectares. And different countries have come up with definitions. And like I have said, Ghana, this first example, says this includes tree crops like cocoa and shea butter. While Nigeria says, no, we cannot include tree crops, because if we include tree crops, it will mean people will clear all the natural forests and plant these tree crops. Some countries are still discussing. Another example is Rwanda. And Rwanda says our country is small. We need to protect every single tree. So the definition of Rwanda goes up to 0.25 hectares, an area that is like that, has trees, as a forest. Actually, there are also the linear forests where even 3 trees with interlocking crowns are forests. In DRC, where the forests are big, they say a forest is an area that must be more than 1 hectare. So with all these kind of conditions, you see when we define deforestation, maybe in DRC, they will say when an area of 1 hectare is cleared, there is deforestation. When in Rwanda, they will say when an area of 0.25 hectares is cleared, there is deforestation. Deforestation is the biggest emitter of...
Mr. Mwangi, you have 5 minutes more.
Oh, okay, then I have to move fast. So these are the activities, and we say the only way of doing mitigation is to reverse these activities. Fires, a common problem, fertilizer use, drainage of wetlands, digging up of soils. So we go to the next slide. And this is basic understanding of photosynthesis. We did this in primary schools, in high school, and we say as trees grow, they sequester CO2 from the atmosphere, and this is stored in the trees, and that means they're cleaning the atmosphere, they're removing the greenhouse gases. So when you continue planting a lot of trees, they remove that gas. When they continue growing, they remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. More trees, more removals. And besides that, they also give us oxygen. The next slide. Then when we deforest, what do? We stop the process of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Sometimes when we burn, we release all that we had stored. So we also stop getting benefits. And when it is degradation, the process of release is slower, but also we slow down the sequestration process. Next slide. And when the trees are growing, we can calculate the amount of emissions or sequestration, the amount of CO2 that we are storing in our forests. In some countries, under the Cancun Agreement, we developing countries were told to use our capabilities and national circumstances when we are doing some of these estimates and describing the monitoring systems. Go to the next slide. And because of these activities that we are doing, many people are coming to Africa and telling us, we can give you money if you show us results of mitigation actions. And this is good because we don't have money, but if we are given some motivation, we could help reduce deforestation and get all the other benefits of the forest, reduce degradation. So this slide is about what can we do? What are those mitigation actions that we can get involved? And they are already forming carbon projects. I don't want to talk much about carbon projects. I know there are a lot of issues. Maybe this could be a discussion for another time. We go to the next slide. And this is about how do we measure? How do we measure? We talk of activity data. This is IPCC that has given us activity data. Sometimes we use satellite land monitoring systems. We ask ourselves, how many hectares? Then we have an emission factor, number of tons of carbon per hectare or per tree. And then when we multiply that, we get the emissions. So I just wanted to illustrate this, and then let us go to the next slide. Maybe I wrote so many slides, and I was illustrating a forest in Kenya, how you map out that. And once you map out that, you get the number of hectares, and you can tell the forest extent reaches just here. You can get the number of hectares planted also. If people have started planting, you can monitor this by satellite, and you can get, in some times, carbon projects work with number of trees. So we monitor every surviving tree. Sometimes you also talk about landscapes. This is a whole landscape. Are we enhancing the carbon by planting more trees in agroforestry systems? And I want to say for each of these projects that we have, there is always validators. When you finish measuring, an external person comes to confirm that what you provided as your number of carbon and what you have mitigated or reduced or sequestered is actually the true number. The next slide.
1 minute left.
Okay, thank you. This is a slide showing what we were monitoring land cover in Rwanda time series. Sometimes you do image number year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you keep on differencing. How much was the difference? How much was deforested? How much was planted? This is just an example. We go to the next one. And this example can apply even to very small project areas. And these are factors that are provided by the IPCC. Sometimes we don't know how much carbon is on, below ground, that is in the roots. And they give us numbers that we can use depending on our areas. We go to the next slide. I think I wasted a lot of time in the introduction. We go to the next slide. And this slide also is about how are our growth rates. No, the previous slide, please. You will give me 1 extra minute. These are how are our growth rates? How can they be compared among tropical forests, other forests like the dryland forest, the coastal forest, and these are numbers. And these help us to estimate that when I grow trees in a tropical forest like in DRC, Cameroon, this is what I get in dryland areas of Kenya, in coastal zones, this is what we would get. Then this is about community participation, and I wanted to say that communities are supposed to be part of these decisions that are made. Under developing countries, we don't have specific regulations, but for Annex 1 countries, whenever a report is made to the UNFCCC, communities have to give their word. Finally, we have this community participation. We go to the next slide. And this slide is about safeguards from Cancun for REDD+. They talk about respect and knowledge for the knowledge and rights of indigenous people, and also the full and effective participation of relevant stakeholders, in particular indigenous peoples and local communities. I hope some of us have been involved in this. The next slide. The next 3 slides were questions just to ask ourselves whether our country, we know what is happening in our countries, whether our countries are reporting, what are the commitments we have made for NDC, and what goes to the forest sector. I know Kenya has 20.8 million assigned to the forest sector. The next question is about how do we emit ourselves and how can we reduce? That's the last slide. How can we reduce emissions that we are doing? And how do we participate in the climate weeks like the one that was in Nairobi? Which were the decisions that were made with regard to what we are interested in? Thank you. That is the last slide.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mwangi James. It was very informative presentation, and as we are running a little bit late from the schedule, I would like to bridge our next speaker with the words of Mr. Mwangi James about the result-based payments described in the Article 6. You made a reference to that, and I think that we have an expert from Finland talking more about Article 6. I would like to welcome warmly Mr. Tuomo Kalliokoski, who is the Finnish climate negotiator and advisor in the Ministry of Environment of Finland. Welcome. The floor is yours. And please let me know if you would wish to share the slides yourself.
Thank you, Nora, for your kind words, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know in which time zone you are living, everybody. Now, it's really nice to be here, and I try to share my screen by myself. Let's see if I'm able to do it. So, do you see my slides now? And by the way, do you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can see your slides, and now the connection is also quite good. There was a little bit audio problems in the beginning of your speech, but hopefully the audio works well.
Okay, let's see.
We can see clearly, and now we can also hear you clearly.
Okay, great. So today I'm trying to give some basic presentation about carbon markets and Article 6. I'm not speaking specifically on land use sector or removals. I'm trying to give you like a big picture of why we are speaking about these carbon markets and what kind of role Article 6 of Paris Agreement is playing there. So at the end of the day, when you look at this, my image of on the first slide, we try to cut down our emissions. So emission reductions is the main thing if we try to reach that 1.5 warming target what we have in the Paris Agreement. And then the markets, they are mechanisms to create some money for somebody. So in this my presentation, I try to first give some context for carbon markets, and then use some basics of Article 6, what we are trying to achieve by it, and what is the elements of it. And then I'm concentrating a little bit more on the climate claims and climate credits. And then I give you some flavor of what we will discuss in next COP in Dubai in coming December, and what kind of future prospects I'm personally seeing in the carbon markets. So, but I like to start with first order principle in climate mitigation. So, as I think in the earlier presentation already about climate mitigation, we understood that the first thing for everybody is that we have to try to avoid to generate any emissions. And if we have emissions, then we try to have to reduce them. And in my thinking, strengthening removals is kind of like counterpart for reducing emissions. And then at the top of this pyramid is the offsetting. So if you have done all these two steps firstly, then you can compensate your emissions by doing something else somewhere else. And these activities should be reserved for hard to abate emissions, for example, like transport sector or agriculture could be that kind of sector, or something else, depending on the country and region. And then the big picture of the carbon markets, why we are speaking about them at all. So for me, the idea is that with markets, you are usually more efficient than if you just regulate something. So with these carbon markets, we try to boost climate mitigation or emission reduction activities by creating a market where you can trade carbon certificates or credits generated by those specific mitigation activities. And then this gives possibility both for countries, but also for companies to cooperate with each other. And that way we bring in some flexibility and efficiency. And then it should be, in theory, for everybody to easier to reach their climate targets. The fact is that we have had these carbon markets already around us quite a long time. We could say that they started in 1997 with Kyoto Protocol under UNFCCC. We had this clean development mechanism and joint implementation, but in the same time we had this voluntary carbon market. So those Kyoto Protocol time, they were about compliance market. But then nowadays we have like I don't know how many, maybe hundreds of international standards in voluntary carbon market, and all of them have different rules, different definitions, different methodologies, varying ways to monitor and report things. And this plethora of things has created lots of critics. How these carbon markets, are they really useful at all? And there has been specifically questions like additionality. Have we reached any kind of like additional activities by carbon markets? Then what about the reversals? You understand, if, for example, if you increase your carbon storage in ecosystem, then maybe somewhere something happened like forest fires or something, and there are reversals. So permanence, how long you can store those carbon in your system? That's a big question. And then also double counting was big issue in climate negotiations, so that you shouldn't calculate the same carbon certificate or carbon credit in 2 different countries, or like in one country and then some company counting the same carbon credit. But the fact is that also in the same time, already have had that critics, those activities through carbon markets, they have supported the development of renewable energy and more sustainable material use and so on. So in my thinking, they have been useful. One thing I also want to say that these carbon markets, they are not only about economics, but there has been a great discussion of social sustainability aspects, and especially in terms of indigenous people, because these carbon market activities, we do them in real world. You go somewhere and usually there are already somebody utilizing that area, and there has been, it's the fact that there has been some violence of rights of local people and so on. So these are now discussed a lot, Article 6 and the Paris Agreement. And today here I'm coming from the Ministry of Environment, Climate Unit of Finland, and so I want, of course, to say something about Finnish viewpoints. So we in Finland, we saw that we want to promote these voluntary climate actions. So it's very important to understand this. Also, this Article 6 under Paris Agreement is voluntary. It's not mandatory. It's not about compliance market. So we want to promote these actions both in Finland and globally. And for that reason, a couple of years ago, or was it last year, we published a guidance for domestic carbon markets. What kind of criteria we should have in our activities? What kind of minimum criteria? How you should regard of additionality, double counting, and so on. And it's for both for companies and individual consumers. Anyhow, in big picture, the key for understanding the current situation in carbon markets is that the guidance or even the regulation regulating the carbon market it's increasing in my view. In Glasgow a couple of years ago, 2021, we got this Article 6 under Paris Agreement agreed, and then under this mechanism we have supervisory body which gives further guidance or recommendations for that mechanism. And then we have had lots of like different initiatives in voluntary carbon market. There are list some of them voluntary carbon market initiative and so on. And then also for international aviation, we have this CORSIA criteria being developed. And then within EU, where we have many proposals from Commission, which we are just now discussing how we should improve the quality of voluntary carbon market. So we are paying more and more attention on the quality and the climate integrity of carbon markets, and that's of course a good thing. And now some words about this Paris Agreement Article 6. You could think it as a new market mechanism with UNFCCC stamp. I personally have been participating in these three different elements of negotiating of these three different elements. So Article 6.2, which is like a umbrella for whole mechanism. It's giving the guidance for whole mechanism. And then Article 6.4, which is more about the private sector, how private sector can be involved in this UNFCCC mechanism, so companies and organizations. And then this Article 6.8 is about non-market approaches, which are really unclear for me. I have not been following it so deeply that I could say that I really understand what it is and how it will be working in future. I already said that this rule book of Paris Agreement was finalized in Glasgow some years ago. After Paris, it took 6 years before we were able to finalize that rule book. And this Article 6 was the last element of the rule book. And the key objective of this carbon market mechanism under Paris Agreement is that through it, we should be able to generate global additional emission reductions. Hopefully, I already said this because this is really important thing. we have those international standards. Carbon markets have been around over 20 years, and this mechanism should bring something new or something more what we have already now. And the big question is that if we are able to create carbon markets which are aligned with these long-term goals of Paris Agreement. And in my personal view, we don't know yet if we have managed to do it or will be able to do it. After Glasgow, there was some analysis of these negotiation outcomes, and there's a text saying that it remains to be seen if this Article 6 will allow for the kind of carbon market that will be liquid, with significant supply of ITMOs coming to the market. I'm going to explain what are the ITMOs, and beyond the level of what is required for piloting and political statements, but a real market supply. And the thing is that after 2 years of that decision, we have not yet seen that kind of market emerging. So those negotiations, details of it are still ongoing. Important aspect to understand is that Paris Agreement is not regulating the voluntary carbon market. So it's kind of like indirect linked between this international market mechanism and the voluntary carbon market, but it's not like a regulation. Anyhow, non-state actors can also participate in this Article 6 mechanism, as I already said. Big issue still under discussions in the negotiations is that what we are really like trading in that market. We need clear definitions. Basically, we have those in the guidance. Here on that slide, I have the definition, which is kind of like understandable for everybody. So carbon credit means a certified mitigation outcome that corresponds to 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. In that image, you can see like some blanks, sawn wood. So it's understandable for everybody that there's some biomass which stores carbon. But in this carbon market, we are not trading anything like that. We are trading certificates, and we have to be able to measure and report and so on how much those projects have generated those emission reductions and how they are linked with those certificates. So the mitigation outcome can be either a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions or increase in carbon removals. That's kind of like a clear definition, understandable definitions. But in fact, in our guidance, it's more complicated, as you can see in this slide. Anyhow, this Article 6.2, originally the idea was that it's for countries, for parties, for bilateral trade agreements. I had to say that it's not so clear anymore. It may be that also companies and other organizations will be interested on this Article 6.2 because the guidance under it may be more flexible than under Article 6.4. But let's see, I don't know. It will be kind of like realized within coming years. And under this Article 6.2, we are trading something called ITMO. And these traded credits are called, so these ITMOs are internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. And as in earlier slide, they can be defined to be certificates which corresponds 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. But in the guidance or the decision of the Glasgow negotiations, we got the result that it can be also something else. For example, something measured in terms of renewable energy, like kilowatt hours. There are lots of new safeguards and limits in Article 6.2 guidance, which we didn't have under Kyoto Protocol. And the big picture is that each participating party should ensure that the outcome of these mechanism activities result net reduction of emissions. But in same time, we have tried to get like rules to be able to follow those trade of credits from the project producing them through the broker, and then for the buyer and for the organization using those credits. Also, the important aspect was in the decision that this double counting discussion, which we had it many years, and it was we found a kind of a clever solution for it. So it's about the authorization. So the double counting means that some country produces credits and then it will use it for its own climate national targets, and then some other country would use also it for its national targets, and or .4, then we are adjust your national greenhouse gas inventory with the amount you had created under this mechanism. That's called corresponding adjustment. And if there's no host country authorization, then you can use it for your own national determined contribution, so your national targets, or within your domestic market. So there are two kinds of credits created within this mechanism, and it's really important to understand. And then, of course, we have this voluntary market, which is not kind of regulated through this mechanism, but it can generate these credits also for these international transferred or then for this host country national targets. So this is kind of like a complex system we have created. And because of that, I want to use couple of minutes for this climate claims. So these two different kind of claims or credits we have nowadays in the market. So this climate contribution claim contributes, for example, for Finnish climate goals. And the company could say that, okay, we have done something which will help Finland to reach our target, national target. And then we don't have to do this corresponding adjustment in our national greenhouse gas inventory. Or then another type of credits is this offsetting credit or claim. And it means that company or some other country will compensate its emissions by this project or mitigation outcome. And then it means that Finland has to do this corresponding adjustment in our national greenhouse gas inventory. So this is really important to understand these two different types of credits and climate claims. And it's up to organizations. Here now I'm coming from country level to the organizational level. That it's up to organization to decide what kind of climate claims or credits they are using. And anyhow, depending on the claim you do, you always should be transparent of it. It should be fulfilling the climate criteria, quality criteria which that standard has, and then you should report those use of those climate units. And those claims should be clear, they should be understandable and justified. And they must not create a misleading image of the emission-free nature of the object causing emissions. So if you say something is carbon neutral, and then you are using credits which you don't know if they will be accounted for some other country or some other organization, then you are not following these kind of like suggestions I'm giving here. About Article 6.4, I basically have already said this, but let's repeat. So this is Article 6.2. Originally, the idea was like bilateral trades between countries, and this Article 6.4 was created for companies and countries interface. And we had this supervisory body under this Article 6.4, which will screen the projects, accept them, and then host country has to also accept, of course, the process. And there are kind of like these two-step verification before you can start issue those UN recognized credits. And these credits are called A6 for ERs, so emission reduction units. And these emission reduction units can be both by countries or companies or even individuals. And they these credits could also be ITMOs if they are transferred internationally or used for CORSIA or some other international purposes. And there I have this. Yes.
Tuomo, please, 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And then this Article 6.8, I already said that this is something unclear for me, so I'll skip it. And then about land removals under Article 6. I would say that they are at the crossroad of two objectives: contribution of the land sector to mitigation, and then how this Article 6 rules contributes to the Paris Agreement overall ambition. And we have kind of like a major challenge here, because in the midst of this century, we should be carbon neutral, or at least around 2070. So it means that we should shift in carbon markets from emission reductions also to removals. But those removals, they have some specific challenges, like I said earlier, about permanence and leakage, and they are more difficult to verify than emissions coming from the factory pipe and so on. So we need more guidance for removals maybe than for some other type of projects. And in Dubai, we are still discussing on these issues. We will get recommendation from the supervisory body on removals, and also for methodologies of the, or on general methodologies of these Article 6.4 mechanisms. We should reach CMA decision for them, let's see. But the important issue that those rules or guidance should generate outcome which or mitigation activities which are consistent with a pathway to overall climate neutrality by the participating parties. And then these Article 6.2 rules, we are still discussing on them, how we avoid double counting, what is really creating that ITMO, and what is the authorization and so on, how we should report, and what kind of infrastructure we should have, or that monitoring and reporting and so on. Lots of things to discuss in Dubai still. But at the end of the day, I think it's up to producers and buyers that what kind of claims and credits they are using. So we don't really know what kind of market we will have in future. But the transparency of these all kind of activities, and to be able to follow from the project to the broker and then the user, the whole line or thread between those different actors on the market. We need kind of like a system where you can improve the current situation where we have faced lots of critics on the carbon markets, that they are not generating overall mitigation, which we need for reaching those goals of Paris Agreement. So the big question for me is that what is the balance in the future between voluntary carbon market and this compliance market, and what is the role of Article 6 within that context? How we could maybe increase the demand for contribution claim, so not only for offsetting and compensation, but kind of like activities which will support the countries to reach their climate targets. And it's still under question mark for me if this Article 6 will be the mechanism which will generate carbon markets which are aligned with Paris Agreement. And as a Finnish officer, a civil officer, I want to say at the end of it that Finland is participating in this negotiation both under UNFCCC and under EU, and we later on will look what is like our national interest on these issues. And I think that was my presentation. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.